minute you give to me as listener, you have one iota more of disinclination to be subscriber. That is to say, the man who reads Nooganomics.com. And I can explain why that is. It's amazing why there's not a bleed from being a host to being the writer and leading blogger in Chattanooga. I'm the leading blogger simply not because I'm better than others, but because I have the largest pen. And that is a 180-foot tower in a secret location. That is my pen, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it. David Tulis, covering local economy and the free markets here in Chattanooga and beyond. And my work as writer, I think, has more significance because it's the written word that changes the way people think. I think perhaps more than just conversation on the radio, right? Because I think the most anybody can do is a host on a deep analysis show like mine is to change a listener's perspective maybe half a degree or 1 degree. The results of that change of thinking, the change of heart perhaps, will show up years later. And just think for a second, if you're in on the coast of Spain and you're heading west toward America, a half a degree error in your direction on the compass will take you to South America, not to Massachusetts. Okay, so you end up with big differences out in the out distances, but not immediately. I'm hoping to change the listener's mind on a few important points, and hope in 10 years that he'll find himself in a different place than he would have been had he not tuned in to Nooga Radio 92.7, 95.3 FM HD4. Again, HD is high definition. And some of the points are, you might say they're arcane, you might say they're obscure, and the things I celebrate are often not warmly met. I was mentioning yesterday to my wife Jeanette, my beloved Jeanette, about a thing I discovered at my morning worship in the scriptures about the word driver. And I'm in the middle of producing some legal materials for the benefit of poor people whom are future state victims, right? Future state victims. I'm preparing a defense for them, and I've been doing a bit of reading every day. I'm promising myself an hour every night working on my review. And so yesterday morning I read the word driver in a reference to the Egyptian army and the chariots destroyed when the Red Sea caved in on them after the Israelites had fled across on dry land to the other side, and the Egyptians, full of pride and manly vigor, and their chariots with the drivers, right, were on the dry seabed, and then they were engulfed in the torrent wall that came back upon them. The Egypt army destroyed in the ending of the miracle, right? When the miracle occurs, God's people are saved. And when the miracle ends, the pagan, the ungodly, the wicked, wrecked. And the word driver is important because as I found by doing a quick look on my NKJV online, driver is a noun. It often refers to servants moving either chariots or goods. And the word drive is a word of compulsion, many times used to show how the Israelites were driving out the Ammonites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and the Canaanites and others. Is what driving is, forcing. There's the work of force. But travel, and here's Jeanette. Jeanette's eyes should have just lightened up as her beloved husband, David Tulis, said, and Jeanette, guess what? The word travel is all about freedom. When the word travel is used, it's about people freely moving about. They're hindered. They're not hindered. They're helped. They want to move freely through the lands, and they ask permission from the Edomite king to pass through freely, and they'll stick to the road, right? They won't ravage the countryside on their way through. And the king, of course, says no. He will not give license to same. And the Israelites traveling under the shadow of the cloud, right, in the Sinai Peninsula, and under the light of the flame in the dark. And so travel is always about liberty and the free movement of people. And driving is always about compulsion and service, and that's a distinction that is important legally, because it still applies today. And here I am. My wife she's not happy about my discussion. She should say, Dave, that's just really terrific. I'm glad you can see that. I don't know any man who would make a big deal out of that, but that you have really strikes me as wonderful. That's what, in my dreams, Jeanette would say, but she's not really keen on that. So I understand that as I deal with ordinary people, and I'm an ordinary man married to an ordinary woman, well, I take that back. She's extraordinary, a woman, a great teacher, a great lover of books, and she's a tutor right now at Ingleside, which is a very, very unique teaching establishment at the foot of one of our local mountains, right? And so she's using the best theory of teaching from Charlotte Mason, which, by the way, Silverdale Baptist Academy is using, supported by the work of an academician at Conant College, by the way, who has specialized in the pedagogy of Charlotte Mason, the English writer and lover of children, and an outstanding writer, by the way. And it's just speaking of books, I've been thinking. There's a friend of mine, the gnome of Strawberry Plains, and I'm thinking that Saturday I'm going to go and visit him. Is it selfish reason or is it merciful reason? Well, he's a carpenter, and he's 70 years old, and he has a wonderful collection of law books, and he's hard pressed for money. His shoulders are aching. We're praying for him at family worship about his bad shoulders that just virtually immobilized this older man with a very sick wife. She's got the sugar, and it's a family in distress, you might say, elderly couple, children, of course, grown and gone in distress. He's a man who I had heard about as a graduate student at UT when I was working on my master's degree in English. A woman at Christ Chapel whom I knew in the middle of a divorce, had children. There was an abusive ex-husband, and her son was being sexually molested by this man. And so somehow she was getting advice from this man whose head was bowed in the UT Law Library, often found there, stacks of books on either side of him, buried in an old volume. And the gnome has books for me, and I've got some green rectangles, I think, for him. Hopefully I can pay what they're worth, but I've got limits too. But I think he really wants to give me some of his best, and I think I'm very excited about that. And I said, Jeanette, I think I may not be going Friday afternoon because, as the gnome said, well, if you come Friday afternoon, there's just not going to be enough time to go through what I've got here and go through the storage shed. So think of my David Tulis loading up on law books that he just I've some law books that, like, I have one law book, I think it's Shannon's. It's a law review from the late 1800s, and John the gnome had gone through that book with great care. Now let me ask you this: do you think that if a man of great character, great knowledge, he's quite critical of me, by the way, I'll have you know that he thinks that I'm making mistakes in some of my analyses. He's very critical. A man who has that many marks in a book, do you think that that's a book I'm going to just pass over? Well, no. When he gave it to me, I said, man, he's really gone through this with great care. So I've read, there was bathroom reading for months for me in the guest bathroom in our book-lined hallway with the dust bunnies on the floor. And I read many things in there just for basic knowledge. From Shannon's, and he'd had probably about 30 pieces of paper, squares of paper in that book. And so the fact that he had read it so carefully and marked certain things, I took as a great blessing. Okay, I take that as a blessing to have a great man, a great unknown man, right? And go ahead of me on some of this reading that I would, if God gives me grace, in which I will be able to follow him. Now, we've got things to get to in the way of news, and I know you don't want to hear so much about me as you want to know about the news. And let me see what the headline I think of this section would be: how state government is having to hire in the Chattanooga area 60 babysitters for college students. Now, this is a kind of a nice story, and it's kind of heartwarming. Mentors sought for students, and it's from TV12, our CBS ally. We are CBS Radio News, and WDEF.com is our CBS TV. affiliate. The story is by Jordan Rudzinski. And the headline is Tennessee promised students need 60 more Hamilton County mentors. Well, it's what's a mentor? The idea of a mentor is certainly good. And the fact that we've lost apprenticeships, we've lost the apprentice model because we have centralized state-run bureaucratic educational or schooling systems. We don't really have mentors anymore. It's a lost art to be a mentor. And so there's something heartwarming about the state saying, well, we need mentors. We need mentors. Can you help? The older people, maybe like you, my listener, would be providing a service individually to students who are part of the free public school, the free college education cartel. And there's an analysis that might be worth hearing another time about why that cartel is there. And I'll just ask you a question about, do you think that if something's valuable, that it should be given away? And how, when the state gives away college educations and associate degree education, do you think that it's valuable, or do you think that is it a last gasp to establish or reestablish or maintain some kind of legitimacy? David Tulis, caller, you're live on the air. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tulis, stand back. I want to open up a can of worms, okay?
Go ahead.
You were talking about speech, basically an expression with billboards and signs earlier. I think it was over an hour ago.
Fill me in. What's the argument?
Discussion?
Go ahead.
Well, and here's what's going to tick off every attorney and lawyer and judge and everyone involved in the system.
Don't do that.
The zoning board and the politicians. They actually believe that there's a difference between commercial speech and speech. And it's all predicated on that, is that they can control commercial speech. Well, it's not qualified in Amendment 1. Speech is speech. There was advertising at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. And if the government can determine what is commercial speech, they can squelch it. And I said all that to say that no government has the authority to determine what goes on a billboard, where the billboard goes, whether it's flashing or its height. And then the next question could become, and I'll pause here for a minute so you can ask a question if you like. How do we enforce a regulation whereby in a neighborhood, somebody down the street has a big flashing light or billboard? Is that your next question?
Well, let me answer your question, Mike, with another question. At what point would that flashing light be a tort to me? Now, a tort, of course, is a wrong and an injury. And if you have a regulatory regime, the whole question of wrong and injury sort of is tossed out the window, and you have instead adherence to the rule that's either strict or not strict, or disagreeing with the rule entirely. If there's a tort by a flashing light and it's flashing into my window, then I have to be able to establish how that's injured me, how I've been wronged, how it hurts me, how it reduces my value, how it causes me to be sick. Or
okay. Let's not get too complicated on this.
Go ahead.
This is real simple stuff. This is how simple it is. That if one claims to be free, they cannot have somebody in session all year round to pass laws. If you have a law, you're not free. Now, you don't need any laws. I mean, I would eliminate every single statute on the books, federal, state, and local, except murder, rape, and crimes that actually hurt people. Do you know why you don't need those? Because if someone is bothering you, you can do equity. You go into a court of law and you ask the judge to do equity. I'm going to give you an example of that. There's no law regarding burning in a particular county. And your next door neighbor, David, decides to burn tires. The smell of those tires are making you sick. The smoke is coming into your house and causing your walls to be black. You can then go to the court and say, this guy is causing a damage. Compel him to stop doing this. Under health, safety, and welfare, they can do that. But when you just arbitrarily pass a law saying this applies to everyone, you're no longer free. So why don't we just pass a law regulating everything?
Mike, here's the argument. Well, but Mike, if you don't pass a law, then you'll actually have that man burning tires in his backyard, and the neighbor's going to be offended and hurt, and his wife, who's very sick, she may actually die. So we want to prevent that.
What's going to happen is you will then go to court and ask the judge to do equity. and compel him not to do that. There will be an order for him to cease.
Well, I know, but
if
the
he
defender
doesn't cease, he'll be held in contempt of court.
Right, I
There's
understand
no
that.
need for a rule, regulation, or statute.
Well, the defender of the ordinance, the idea of ordinances, Mike, says, well, we want to prevent that poor woman from having to take the first breath of that smoky air from the neighbor burning tires.
Well,
we want to prevent
here's
that.
the decision we have to make as a republic. We can't claim to be free and have regulations. There's a risk with a free people. There's a risk in everything. And if you want to be regulated and overregulated, you're not a free people. Let's just regulate everything. From the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, from the time we're born to the time we die. Let's regulate everything. And then, but we as a people can't celebrate the 4th of July and say, I live in a free country. I'm free.
Well, Mike, no one talks about that anymore anyway. So you're hearkening back to the 50s and 60s, I think.
No, people think they're free, David.
I know, but they don't.
People
They don't
really do.
examine what it means.
Talk to anybody. Ask them if they're free. Oh, yeah, I'm free. And then ask them, what can't you do without permission? And then ask a politician, what can't you do? What does the Constitution forbid you from doing? Well, we can do anything. We can pass any law we want. You see, we're in a state of anarchy. These laws are actually anarchy. We're in a state of lawlessness because they're not laws, they're rules and regulations imposed upon us in an arbitrary manner that affects our individual freedom. And I recommend everyone read Frederick Bastiat's The Law. No one should be able to graduate high school or homeschooling.
And that's Bastiat, is Bastiat, Frederick Bastiat, and it's online for free. I would get a printed copy and keep it on your bookshelf. Well, let me ask you this, Mike. The person who's concerned about viewshed, okay, a very pious, holy sort of person with a college degree, wears nice shirts and ties and drives a nice car. He doesn't want to see a neighbor who's got a garish paint job and signs and words in this person's yard. He doesn't want a flashing light. He says this all disturbs my tranquility, and I really want my neighborhood to look like a neighborhood. Does that person deserve to live in a city, or why is that? Why do people like that live in the city and then try to control what other people do, that activities that are harmless and innocent? Where should that person go? What should that person do to get a better idea?
I agree with you to the extent that people typically voluntarily cooperate with each other to get along. So you're not going to see that in residential areas, maybe around Christmas time, just because of peer pressure. But when you're in the city, you're in the city, and you're going to have flashing lights. And I would just say move. If you don't like where you're at, move. But understand where you are. If you move into a city, expect that. And politicians need to understand there's no difference between, I had this problem years ago in Florida where someone wanted to fly a balloon, but they said, we can't do that because there is an ordinance forbidding the flying of a balloon. I said, really? To promote your business, that's not allowed? And I said, well, why don't you argue that under the first? Oh, I'm not going to do that. It's too much money. It costs too much. We're not going to argue speech under the First Amendment.
Well, the other thing to point out, Mike, is that people think that they can't do anything unless they hire a lawyer. People can do a lot just by reading the applicable law and saying, I'm going to make a statement. I'm citing the law. I'm citing my First Amendment rights, and I'm going to do it myself. You don't have to have a lawyer for everything. It's not.
Let me tell you what's
courts are not as intimidating as people think.
You're going to plea bargain or lose. Lawyers don't know how to win.
Well, in a civil matter,
to trial.
A civil matter, you have an edge.
The system is going to charge you with multiple crimes, so you plead to one or two. It's a con job. It's a scam. It's a moneymaker. You hire a lawyer, your lawyer is going to do one of two things: plea bargain or lose. Now, if I'm wrong, please somebody call and tell me where I'm wrong. That you've ever. I want one person to call, David, and tell me where they've hired a lawyer and won. In any case, they've hired an attorney and they won. Call me and tell me when and where.
Mike, in every case, there's a winner.
Have you ever met anyone that's hired a lawyer and won?
50% of the cases, Mike, in 50% of the cases in which lawyers participate, there's a winner, right? Because someone loses and someone wins, and so there's always an allocation of winning and losing with lawyers. So one lawyer lost and the other one won.
Many times, lawyers are officers of the court. People have to understand their allegiance is not to you, but the court, the system. They are officers of the court. They've pledged allegiance to that. They are not there looking out for your interest. They're looking out for the system's interest as officers of the court. When you stand there and argue a case, you're a free person wanting justice. They are your employee. That judge is your employee, and everyone in that courtroom that collects a check from the government is your employee. And you're demanding they do what you tell them to do because you're arguing the law.
Mike, this is David Tulis. Thanks for joining us, Mike. This is David Tulis, and you are enjoying the last moment here of the David Tulis program at 92.7 live on Facebook. Tune in every day.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD.